Today's guest is Esben Friis-Jensen, co-founder of Userflow, a no-code onboarding tool he bootstrapped to $4.6 million in revenue with just 3 people before selling to Beamer in a deal reported to be over $60 million. Before Userflow, Esben spent 7 years building Cobalt, a VC-backed cybersecurity company that raised $37 million and grew to over 200 employees. He left that company without a financial outcome. Then he built Userflow as a complete opposite. No VC, no hiring, no meetings, maximum ownership. In this episode, we get into what the Cobalt experience taught him, how he and his co-founder paid themselves first and designed the company around the life they wanted, and what life looks like now that he's essentially retired in his early 40s with nowhere he needs to be. If you've ever wondered what happens when you finally achieve the freedom you were chasing, this one's for you. Welcome to another episode of Profit Led. I'm your host, Melissa Kwan, co-founder of eWebinar. This season, we're exploring the intersection of passion, profit, and purpose, and how those things change as founders evolve and come into financial success. Let's get started. Esben, at the start of your career, when you were at Accenture, what did success look like for you?
I think when I started my career, I had big ambitions. I wanted to be the leader of some kind of big company or something similar to that. In Accenture, they have this kind of traditional pyramid model, right? You have some young people doing a lot of work, and then you kind of grow in the pyramid. And I loved that at the beginning of my career, that you could kind of easily see the next path, the next kind of step in the ladder. And I would work late hours to achieve the next level and deliver high performance. So I think in that part of my career, I was all about work late hours, work more than I need to, and grow my career so I can become, at that point in time, I wanted to be like the CEO of a large company or something like that.
I mean, the last job that I had was at SAP.
Yeah.
So I fully understand that pyramid. It wasn't really for me. I didn't have that ambition, but it's interesting to see that you already had kind of that drive in you, but just within a corporate structure. So in 2013, you and 3 friends moved from Copenhagen to San Francisco to start a company. And at the time, I guess there was no VC scene in Denmark. So take me back to that moment. What was going through your head and what did you think was waiting for you kind of on the other side in San Francisco?
So just taking a step back, I think what I realized in Accenture when I was there is I kind of lacked owning the end result. I think as a consultant, you do, and even in Accenture, we're very much hands-on and implement stuff, but we were just, implementing it, and then we didn't really own it afterwards, right? Like we were not kind of accountable in all ways to the end user. We just had to deliver this kind of typically SAP software. And then whether the end users were successful with it or not was not the most important thing. The most important thing was the executives at the company we were servicing felt that they got the service they expected. So I was always like feeling I was missing something. I felt like I was looking for basically something where I could be more part of a company, be part of something where you actually own the ultimate end result. So I started looking for kind of more traditional companies like product companies and stuff like that, where I could potentially work. But I could also feel when looking at those companies that what they had in like being hands-on to a product, they lacked in ambition and these kind of things that I was looking for. So it's really hard to find that perfect match where they had ambition, but they were more of a product company. But then my friend Jacob, who had met in Accenture, he had left 1 year prior and moved to Argentina. He kind of convinced me that we should do a startup. We were always the 2 last ones in the office in Accenture. So we had a lot of like late night talks, and that's how we got to know each other. And basically when he reached out and said like, why don't you want to do a startup with me? I took some convincing because it was like a risky move, right? I felt, but the more we talked about it, the more kind of convinced I got that this could be something fun to try out, and the risk of doing it was not really too big. In Denmark, we have a very wide safety net. If you lose your job, you don't really suffer too much. And I felt I could always go back and work at Accenture if I wanted to. So what I actually did initially was a 3-month sabbatical from Accenture. And then I packed my bag and flew to Argentina to join Jacob and 2 other of his friends, one of them being his brother. And then we kind of started on this project that became Cobalt.
Were you kind of dead set on like, I'm going to go raise money, build a startup in San Francisco? Like, what did you think was kind of there waiting for you?
I didn't even know that world existed when I started the startup, to be honest. I knew some entrepreneurs in Denmark, but the startup scene was, from my perspective, non-existent. There was a couple, the Just Eat founder in Denmark, he had written a book that I had read. So he was like one of the stories I'd heard. And I'd always been like fascinated by some of these startup stories, but they were few, right? You also had the Skype story. One of the Skype founders is from Denmark. So those were the like only stories I had heard about. So it wasn't like I was familiar with the startup scene or anything like that. But I think what was happening at that year or 2013 was that definitely startups were getting more attention in the media. So it was becoming more of a cool thing to do. And I think one of the big things that had happened was Tim Ferriss wrote the book 4 Hour Workweek, right? Which I think many people read. And that also became an inspiration for many to do. How can I build that? How can I build that kind of lifestyle? And that was also part of me making the decision to look into the startup world. So yeah, I didn't have a strong ambition to do anything with this really. I just wanted to do something different than Accenture and do something that could potentially become big, where you could kind of have ambition and build a true product where you owned the end result.
And before Userflow, as you mentioned, you spent 7 years at Cobalt. It was 4 total co-founders, right? So you had 3 other co-founders.
Yep.
37 million raised, 200 employees. And I mean, that's a company that many founders listening would envy having in theory, but you left. So what happened there that drove you to walk away from the company that most founders want?
So I think 7 years is, first of all, it's a long time to be in a company, and we did have a lot of fun on the way, and I enjoyed a lot of the ride. But what I think started happening was we were growing the company and we were hiring more and more employees, which, I mean, in some ways is a good thing, right? It means the company is growing. But in other ways, it also typically means that you as a founder have to take a step back and empower your employees to take the control and kind of do the tasks. And that means that you have a risk. I felt that was happening to me, that I became disconnected more and more from the product and the customers, where we, in the beginning, we were 4 founders and we had, of course, I had to agree with the 4 founders, but it was a much easier kind of path to change the product, change go-to-market, or change anything, compared to when you're in a 200 employee company and you want to do a change. It's significantly harder, even as a founder. So I think I kind of got tired of that the organization actually resulted in things moving a bit slower and me not having the same kind of power to impact stuff that I wanted. So that's the reason I eventually ended up leaving Cobalt. And by the way, Cobalt is still a very operational company and growing company. So I think I left in good conditions, but it was important for me to do something else because I was just tired of it, basically.
I mean, you've said publicly, you can build this amazing company and get very little out of it. What did you mean by that? And what did that experience, I guess, teach you about the relationship between effort and reward?
Yeah, I think you can say in Cobalt, I continued on the path that I kind of had in Accenture, where I would work late hours, work. So work extremely hard, especially the early years of Cobalt. And we decided to raise capital, which meant we diluted ourselves as founders, and we raised Series Angel, Seed, Series A, Series B. And suddenly, also because we were 4 co-founders, the stake you had in the company were not that big anymore. But you were still working many hours, but you were just earning basically like a normal executive salary, right? And I think even sometimes a bit lower salary, because as a founder, you're not expected to pay yourself a huge chunk of money in a VC-backed company. So what I meant when I said that was basically like, when you decide to raise VC money, you're kind of already going on the path that you're starting to work for somebody else. You're no longer in control of the company to do whatever you want, to pay yourself a high salary, to sell the company when you want, and these kind of things. So what many VC-backed founders end up with is basically that they end up in this kind of stale state where you still have ownership in the company and you are maybe working a lot, but you don't have the decision power to potentially exit the company and get some financial reward out of that. And you cannot even determine your own salary and these kind of things, right? So even though you worked hard, you built a huge company, with Cobalt, it's 200 employees, right? I still haven't gotten, a huge payout from building Cobalt, right? I still think it's fantastic. We built a great company. We help many businesses become more secure. So yes, I can value that part of the journey and got to work with a lot of amazing people. But for me personally, the financial reward has been very little, right? So far. We'll see in the future. They can still, exit the company or do something.
And instead of taking a break, you immediately started another company, which was Userflow. But this time you chose to do everything opposite. Like, it cannot be more different, right? No VC, no hiring, smallest team possible, maximum ownership with one other founder. So how much of Userflow's experience was a direct reaction, I guess, to what you did at Cobalt? And what were the specific things you said, I'm never going to do that again?
Basically, it was a very strong reaction because it was like the complete counter to what I was doing. And I was also actually, before I made the decision, I was a bit in doubt. Is this a good choice to leave this company, which is highly successful, right, in all aspects? But I'm just personally not so happy with what I'm doing and my impact, right? But my good friend Sebastian, who was my co-founder at Userflow, he had tried to convince me 1 year prior, and then he finally got me convinced because I got basically so tired of being in a larger company, and said, why not? Let's do this. Let's see what we can do. And Sebastian, he was very much on that. He's always been on that path. Actually, he never wanted to build a big company. He never wanted to raise money. So I kind of also learned from him that that's a viable path, that you can basically bootstrap a business and you can do it in a very product-led way instead of, relying on sales. In Cobalt, we were actually product-led in the beginning, but became very sales-led. And that meant you were always having to do sales meetings, alignment meetings, customer success meetings. So there was a lot of meetings in Cobalt. And that basically meant the flexibility you could have in your life was very limited, right? Because you were always required to be available for meetings and participate in meetings. So that was one of the big things I loved about joining Userflow was Sebastian and I had no meetings, or we had one meeting a week, which later turned into a Slack conversation. And I think that was one of the key things is like, we want to build a smaller company. We don't necessarily want to hire anybody. We want to do it in a profit first way. We want to do it in a way where we don't have to do a lot of meetings. Ideally, we don't want to do a lot of sales calls and stuff like that. So yeah, a complete opposite to what we were doing at Cobalt. So that excited me as well. Yeah. So it was definitely a counter reaction and something I was looking for to have a more interesting, kind of impactful role, but also a more flexible lifestyle.
I mean, that's the thing that people don't understand about going up market. Everybody thinks going up market means more revenue, but more revenue means you're actually giving up your life. So your business model determines your lifestyle. So I had 2 SaaS companies before this, but we sold enterprise. So I was the one doing those meetings, doing those calls, going to conferences, needing to be available. Sometimes customers would text me. When you live through that, I think some people really love that, or maybe it doesn't bother them. But for me, I was building a company to free myself in my life, but then I had built this thing that did the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's funny because you're like, okay, now I want to build a 2-person company, but counting back, I guess 10 years before that, you're like, I want to be the CEO of Accenture, which is even worse. Yeah. So let's talk about money for a second. You left Cobalt without cashing out, and then Userflow starts printing cash.
Yeah.
Like 4.5 million or a little bit more. 3 people. I think the majority of that journey was just 2 of you, right?
Yeah. The designer was always there, but he was freelancing. So he was only working part-time, eventually full-time, but still part-time.
So that's $1.5 million per employee. So where did that money go? Were you and Sebastian just paying yourselves huge salaries, or were you keeping it in the company?
We were paying ourselves huge salaries. So I think both Sebastian and I, that's how we thought about it. Like, we want to build a business, and to make it fun, we also have to be financially rewarded along the way. We cannot just wait for this kind of exit. And we felt that we could run the company pretty much just the three of us. So instead of going out and hiring someone, we decided we just want to pay ourselves really high salaries so we can live a really good life while building a great company. And we were very lucky that Userflow were in a market that took off with the entire product-led growth. We did user onboarding, and we had built like something that was differentiated enough in the market to get a lot of customers and in a highly product-led way. So yeah, we were very quickly a highly profitable business and could therefore pay ourselves very well.
I mean, that's a remarkable story. And, having lived through so I had 2 startups before eWebinar, and I always thought I couldn't pay myself. I always pay myself last, pay other people more. Mm-hmm. And I wanted this suffering because if I suffered, I felt like that was a necessary ingredient to success. Right. And as you said, like a lot of VC-backed companies, which were like friends around me, they also weren't getting really even livable salaries because we were all in New York.
Yeah.
And so I now know that the founders actually have to take care of themselves first so that they can have the mental capacity in the space to make good decisions. Right. Especially when you're bootstrapping, right? Like if you are constantly in survival mode, you can't make good decisions.
No.
Right. And you have to make so many concessions in your life, especially if you're in your 30s or your 40s. Like you see all your friends living these normal lives and you can't do that. I think nobody really talks about that, right? It's like a mental baggage that you carry, that you feel like I'm a failure, I'm not good enough. But if you can turn that around, build a successful business and actually start paying yourself, you can just have fun doing it. Right. So how did your lifestyle change, right? As that revenue grew, you paid yourself. And how did your relationship with money shift? Because I guess this would be the first time you have these huge salaries and you have money to spend.
Yeah, I think you can say what I learned at Cobalt, which was probably a good thing, was to be frugal. And I think both Sebastian and I are very frugal with money. We also learned that further at Userflow, right? Because we didn't want to spend huge chunks of money if we didn't see the kind of result. So the way we did business was also very frugal and focused on profit. And you can say, even though we were paying ourselves large salaries, so we could live a really good life, it didn't mean that we, were flying first class and, buying sports cars and stuff like that. We were living pretty much normal lives, but we didn't have to think about money, which was fantastic, right? And I think that was the primary difference, where in Cobalt, you always had, I wouldn't say I had to think about money, but, it was not like I could just buy whatever I wanted and don't think about it, right? So, yeah. So I think it created some kind of comfort, but not I didn't end up in a luxurious lifestyle or anything like that from getting the money. And I think actually a lot of that came from my startup mindset, where you are very frugal in the way you think and almost to a fault, right? So I could probably spend a bit more on myself.
Well, at some point, I mean, you guys were financially comfortable. The company was profitable, growing without, any other staff. You're not managing anybody. You're not really grinding, right? So there's no financial pressure with VCs. Mm-hmm. The product was kind of running itself, right? So what was driving you guys to keep going, or driving you to keep going? And what were you waking up in the morning for? Hey, I want to take a minute to talk about the thing that makes my life and this podcast possible, my own company, eWebinar. Here's something no one questions. We expect every piece of content in our personal lives to be available on demand, from this podcast to our favorite TV show. But when it comes to business webinars, whether it's demos, training sessions, or onboarding calls, anything where a live person has to show up and deliver content, we're still asking people to be somewhere at a specific time on one specific date, hoping they'll make it, and it just doesn't scale. The average attendance rate for a live webinar is 30 to 40%. That means the majority of people who want your content never see it. Prospects who never see your demo don't convert. Customers who skip onboarding don't activate. Anyone who misses training won't adopt your product. eWebinar was built to solve that. We turn any video into an interactive experience that runs on autopilot 24/7 in every time zone. Your audience joins when it works for them. And our live chat lets you respond to questions in real time or later through email, so every question gets answered and nobody feels ignored. It outperforms live by every metric. Attendance, watch times, engagement, and conversion rates are all higher. When live delivery is no longer the bottleneck, you open up a whole new world of opportunities. And that's the real unlock. You're not just replacing the webinars you're already doing. You're finally creating all the ones you never had bandwidth for. The onboarding series, the product walkthrough, the sales demo for that segment you've been meaning to go after. Come see it for yourself. Visit ewebinar.com to join our demo at your own time. No salesperson required. All right, let's get back to the episode.
So I think the primary thing was to enhance the product, right? Like I was like seeing that was the power of Userflow. It's a product you can continuously enhance, which was amazing. Cobalt was the same. It's like this kind of product where you can just keep adding new features and see how they go. And that was the fun part, like building new stuff. Among other things, we launched the AI assistant pretty quickly after GPT-4 came out. So those kind of things were what kept us going, is like building new stuff that could grow the company even further. And that kind of mindset that the more revenue we got, the higher salary we could pay ourselves, right? So that was also a kind of like an incentive for us. So even though we already had nice salaries, it's always nice to, earn more. So you can say in Cobalt, I didn't have that, right? Because if I was helping growing the company, I was growing the equity. I wasn't growing my salary, right? And that's a much more intangible kind of value, which when you've been doing it for 7-8 years, you kind of learn, okay, that's way too intangible, right? It's not something you can easily get anything out of unless you sell something on the secondary market, which some founders are lucky enough to do. But yeah, so I think that was the primary incentive. And then the second part was, how can we make this even more flexible, right? Stuff we started doing at Userflow, some would say we became kind of arrogant because things were working so much self-service. I started saying no to all sales calls unless they had done like a trial with us. I didn't want to, speak on a call with anybody because we did have a book, a demo form, but we kind of moved it to a hidden place on the website. And the people who would then go on our support channel asking for, a call, I would always push back and say, have you done the trial? Because the trial is pretty self-explanatory. And if they hadn't, I said, then please do that first and come back if you still need a call. And many would come back and say, we don't need a call. We see everything now. It's very clear. So sometimes that kind of arrogance helps you become more successful in your product-led motion, right? So I think that helped us also create even more flexible lifestyle around the company, which meant I could travel a lot more. I had a kid around that same year when we really hit it off. So that helped us be able to, live a life where I could travel the world, or at least the US, have a kid and still run a highly successful SaaS company.
And you could have pushed all those calls to eWebinar, but we weren't around.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're such a pragmatic person, right? Every time I talk to you, you're just like, this is what we did. 1, 2, 3. We followed the system. Like, you make it sound so doable.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, building a company, 3 people, really crowded market, actually a very red ocean market with VC-backed competitors. It doesn't seem like it could be as smooth as you make the story sound. Like, were there parts that were hard? Like, were there moments where you felt like maybe this wouldn't work, or you questioned if you were on the right path?
No, I don't, because we were seeing like continuous growth. I don't think we ever let's say we lost a large customer, right? We would of course have concerns. Are we going to lose more large customers, right? We would always have that.
What was a large contract what was the range of the contract value?
I think our largest contract was around 60K or something. So,
okay. So it's not insignificant. It's pretty big.
No. And we might have lost one or two of those where we are like, okay, ouch, that was a big customer to lose. If we had customer success, would we have kept them, like more hands-on customer success? But then on the other hand, if we had that, we wouldn't be able to live that flexible lifestyle, right? And be highly product led. And I think what we saw over time is like we're able to get new customers at a rate, so it doesn't hurt so much that we lose one of these customers. We weren't like the customer saturation. It was not like we had one or two very large customers. We had a lot of like mid-size and small customers, right? And in that way, we were not so vulnerable to one customer churning, even if it was a big customer. But of course, that hurts. It always hurts when a large customer leaves. And you always kind of think, should we change something? Should we do something? So I think we did have experiences like that, but in overall, we mostly saw success in what we did. And I think the reason for that was that we stayed very close to our customers. We were always the ones on support, right? Because we were a small team. We were always using our own product to see how can we make it smarter? How can we make it better? So we would discover the new features and how they should be built before our customers would. So we were always like one step ahead when it came to like building the product. We just felt that everything was working and it kept on working. So it sounds easy, but I also think it's a good mindset to have that it is easy. And I think that's actually the biggest blocker for many companies who want to be product led is they don't have that mindset. They always think like, we can't do that because X, Y, Z, right? We can't have a free trial because of security is an excuse I've heard, right? Like, of course you can. Like, if you cannot have that, then your security is terrible if you cannot do a free trial because of security, right?
I mean, I think the unique thing about you and Sebastian was you were so lifestyle focused. And you understood that everything has a trade-off, right? Of course, every company can go up market, but what is the trade-off, right? Like how many people do I have to hire for how much money do I have to raise? And you've got customer success, right? So you were willing to have that trade-off for the lifestyle that you were living. And that's awesome, right? So the Beamer deal, who, you eventually sold to, I guess this conversation happened through a conference, right, in Dublin. But you weren't really looking to sell at the time. You said you were just ignoring like some acquisition emails. So what was different about this particular company or this deal that made you say, okay, like let's start having this conversation?
Because we were paying ourselves really well and we knew we had a good growth in the company and we were living already a flexible lifestyle. So we didn't have like that pressure to sell or do anything. We were not like actively looking, but we did have acquisition offers also before the Beamer acquisition offer. Most of those were in pure stock, which didn't really interest us because if you sell for pure stock, you basically just end up working for somebody else and then you have to rely on them to build a successful company, right? So what the Beamer deal gave us was more cash on table and an opportunity for us to also not be operationally involved. We were operationally involved for a short while, but then left the operations later, right? And I think that was the kind of deal we were interested in. And then, of course, also at a multiple that we thought justified us not giving up on our nice salaries, right? So we had to kind of look at the math to see how many years do we have to work to earn the same. And then we made that calculation and decided this is a good deal. Let's do it. And then the other positive thing was that they wanted to continue the brand as it is and actually build further on that brand and the product. So that was also super nice that we were giving it to somebody who actually wanted to continue the product and not just close it down, as you see with larger companies. When they buy something, they often close down the product or it disappears.
So what was it like to hand over something you built that was so hugely successful with such high velocity?
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, first of all, when you sell, you're so happy. It's great, right? Like it's a good payday. But then, of course, it's hard to give away a product that you've been working on and thinking about every day for the last years. Had many kind of future dreams of what should happen with the product, right? And now you're leaving that ownership to somebody else to decide if what's going to happen with the product. So that was, of course, hard. I'm happy that we didn't have to stay operationally involved for too long, because I think it's really hard as a founder to not, and that was, going back to what happened at Cobalt, it's hard for a founder to stay out of the decisions, to not be impactful in what happens. But when you're giving the ownership and control to somebody else, you need to do that. And sometimes it's easier just to get out. And I think I learned that at Cobalt, and that's the same I learned at Userflow. It's kind of like, it's easier just to get out of the operations and not be involved, and then let the people make the decisions without you trying to influence them yourself.
So you had a pretty significant exit. How did it feel for you when that wire hit the bank?
So I think because we had already had good salaries for years before that, I mean, it is, of course, life-changing. It meant that I basically don't have to work for the rest of my life unless I want to. So that's, of course, life-changing. But because we had already, paid ourselves good salary, it wasn't like a huge change. I'd already lived a life where I was traveling the US and the world, living a good flexible lifestyle. Selling the company just meant that I could be even more flexible, spend even more time with my family, which is something I think was one of the most positive sides. Was now, like with Userflow, I could definitely spend more time with my family than I could with Cobalt. But now I could spend even more time with them. And now I have a second kid. So it makes it even greater, right? But yeah. So yeah, I think it was a great day, but it wasn't like I was already living a good life. So it wasn't like changing my life significantly.
So now you're in this post-exit chapter. You're consulting companies on product-led growth, sharing your knowledge, traveling, like you said, spending time with family.
Yeah.
You're basically retired. So what does a typical week look like for you? Does it feel like you finally achieved this nirvana of like ultimate freedom?
Well, I am I'm not fully retired because I'm consulting with PLG, of course. But
only because you want to.
Yeah, because I want to. But yeah, I was retired for at least 1.5 years, or after we sold or something, or 1 year. What I learned, and I actually learned this back in Cobalt already. So in 2018, before I left Cobalt, I actually went on a sabbatical for 6 months because I was worked out. I had worked way too much, and it was hurting like relations and all this kind of stuff, right? So it was like I needed a break to realize that the company can live without me. I think that's one thing I realized. And I can live a life where I'm not working and I'm actually happy. I'm traveling, I'm experiencing new stuff, I'm learning new stuff, reading books. I think I learned that from that 6 month sabbatical, that I don't need to work to be happy. So with Userflow, it already started like the flexible. That's also a part of why I joined Userflow, is like, okay, now I can have an even more flexible lifestyle where I don't have to work so much. And then when we exited, it was amazing to not work at all and live this kind of sabbatical lifestyle where we just travel. We decided, my family and I decided to go to some further away places like Australia and French Polynesia and this kind of stuff, right? So you could go a bit further away and not be in the same time zone as the US. So I think for me, it was not like I missed working. I really just kept on enjoying my life. I hear a lot of founders, like they sell the company and then they have to get quickly back to building a new company because they kind of miss working or having a purpose. And I think for me, the purpose was just, work doesn't have to be there to have a purpose. You can do exercise. You can enjoy time with your family. You can travel. And I think that's part of what I learned from that sabbatical back in 2018 is there are equally important things in life than doing work.
I mean, now with all this cool AI stuff happening and the world is growing at an exponential pace, there's all this new technology coming up. Are you having conversations with yourself at all about whether you're going to start building again? Or is this just a completely new chapter of your life where you want to just focus on you, your family, and just have fun?
No, I'm definitely staying connected to what's going on. I think I want to do that because it's also just to stay up to date on what's going. I think even if I'm not going to do a new startup, it's you need to be aware of what's happening with AI because it's going to impact everybody in the world, what you can do and how the world's going to function in the future. So it's important to stay up to date on what's going on. So I am playing with AI tools, and I am thinking sometimes maybe we should do, one more startup. Esben and I often talk about it. And especially when you see these like high growth stories where a lot of it is product led, right? It's Lovable is product led. GenSpark is product led. It's these highly product led motions. And that's amazing that this combination of AI and product led is really kicking it. And I think Esben and I would fit perfectly in that world. But I also know that once you start on a company, it is going to be a lot of work, especially in the beginning, to build the initial audience, build the first customers, get them to use the product, find that product market fit. And it's not just a walk in the park. We were lucky with Userflow, but even Userflow, did take some work in the beginning. So yeah, I think I always have that in the back of my mind that yes, everything is very exciting now, but it's also going to take a lot of work to actually run a company. And right now, I'm much happier doing more exercise, enjoying time with my family and these kind of things. So I don't think I'm ready to do anything right now.
So when you think about your purpose, right, what is your purpose now versus, what it was before and like how has it shifted over time, if at all?
Yeah, purpose. It's a hard word. What is your purpose, right? I think there's definitely a chase for financial freedom has always been there. Now, when you have it, you don't have to think about it. And I think many founders actually struggle when they achieve, if that was the ultimate goal and they achieve it, they struggle with what's going to be my next goal, right? But for me, achieving financial freedom was just a sub goal to the ultimate goal, which is then I can do whatever I want, right? Like I can exercise, I can spend time with my family, I can travel when I want, these kind of things, right? For me, that's at least for now more than enough to enjoy life. So I think that's my purpose right now is just travel as much as possible, spend time with family, and keep on learning new stuff and exercise. I think exercise is very underrated I think many startup founders, and I know I did at Cobalt, stop doing exercise when they are building companies and you become super unhealthy and it's not good for you or for the company because you actually think better when you're healthy. And so it's just one of those things that now I have the freedom to do that much more again. I'm much happier.
And what matters most to you now, like that maybe you didn't care about before?
I didn't have a family before, so I didn't. Family is definitely the most important thing for me now. And then, as I said, traveling and exercise and that kind of freedom to do whatever you want is highly important.
So how do you define success today after that entire journey? And like as compared to when you first moved to San Francisco in 2013?
I think ultimately it's actually the same in some ways. It is, and I achieved it, right? I achieved the freedom to be able to do what I want. And I think that was also the goal when I initially started Cobalt together with my three friends. It was also what we were pursuing, right? Of course, we wanted to build a great company, build a large company. But ultimately, there was also this pursuit of financial freedom and be able to basically be able to do what you want, right? So I think back then it was the success criteria and today it's the success criteria. You can say maybe even in Accenture, it was also the success criteria to become a CEO. And that back then I had like an idea that would mean that you would have financial freedom. But actually what I've learned over the years is if you're CEO of a large company, you might have financial means to do everything you want, but you have no freedom because you're working all the time. And that's not success to me.
Absolutely. Well, Esben, thank you so much for this conversation today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for spending time with me. Real quick, if what we talked about today resonated with you, the best thing you can do to pay it forward is to share it with someone you think would enjoy it too. The only way this podcast grows is by word of mouth. Whether that's a review, a post, or even a text to a friend, it would mean the world to me and would help me keep this podcast going. Hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And head over to profitled.fm for show notes. If you want to connect or share feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Find me at melissakwan.com. That's MELISSAKWAN.com. Thanks for listening. Bye now.